Masochist! Welcome back to another installment of r/no sleep. Today, from a new author, N-Cubed02. Title: My Friends and I Found an Abandoned Oil Rig, Part 1. Like always, please like and subscribe. Let's get into it. I watched as the helicopter pilot began his preparations to take off, barely a minute after touching down on the helipad. As Mark helped Savannah step down off of the vehicle, the pilot gestured towards his headset, and I fished my radio receiver from my pocket and put my own headset on, barely quieting the still spinning rotors. You guys good? I think we're good here, man. Thanks again. Don't mention it. Just remember that you've only got exactly 48 hours. If you're not back on the platform and ready by then, I'll have to wait another week to swing back around to get you, and that'll cost extra. Good luck. I'll see you guys then. I thanked him, and as soon as the others finished unloading our prepared bags onto the helipad, we stood and watched as the helicopter took flight and disappeared quickly into the inky blackness of a starless night. I waited a moment longer, looking out into the open ocean below me, my headlight beam faintly glittering against the calm ripples of the sea. We don't have all night. Let's get indoors before the wind picks up, Julian muttered, breaking the silence. I turned away from the sea and towards the group. Julian had already picked up his duffel bag and had already begun to hastily move towards the stairs descending to the crew quarters. Mark seemed solemn as usual, but even in the dark I could make out the smile creeping through his face as he helped Savannah grab her bags as she kissed him on the cheek. Maria sat silent, eyes locked on the clouds that had swallowed up our transport. As Mark and Savannah descended out of view, I stood next to my sister, putting my hand on her tense shoulder as I noticed her knuckles turn white gripping her backpack. You all right? I asked after a moment. She stood motionless, and I felt her shoulders shivering. Mark said we should be able to get the rig's reserve power on. If we get inside, we'll be able to warm up. She turned her head to me and attempted to mask her frightened face with a sheepish smile. Yeah, sure. Sorry, it's just different than I expected. A bit, yeah. I lied. In truth, I'd studied my ass off doing as much work prior to our arrival at the rig. I poured through company records. I'd watched every video I could explaining oil rig architecture, and I'd even researched local oceanic weather patterns this time of the year for this area. She begged to come along, but now, stranded here shaking, it was obvious she hadn't prepared like the rest of us. I gently grabbed her backpack from her shaking hand and made my way towards the staircase. She followed close behind. As we made our way towards the large bolted door sealing off the crew area, she quietly called over. Hey Ellie, what's up? Thanks for letting me and Julian tag along. I nodded as if it were no big deal that they'd been permitted to join this expedition. Mark had approached me weeks ago with the opportunity of a lifetime, an oil rig in international waters, decommissioned for almost a decade, unmanned, and slated to be dismantled in the coming months. Even though we were further away from a city than any of us have ever been, this was undoubtedly an urban explorer's wet dream. It had been years since Mark, Savannah, and I had the opportunity to go somewhere new, and with our increasingly busy lives, we figured that this was the perfect last hurrah for our old hobby. The timing worked out perfect, and we each managed to scrape enough money together to find and hire a private helicopter pilot to make the 2 trips required to drop us off and pick us back up. In all fairness, Maria had joined us on some of our trips in years prior. Being a few years younger than us, we opted to let her tag along on our lower stakes outings. But she was an adult now, and had begged to be allowed to come with us for this final trip. It took a substantial amount of convincing for Savannah and Mark to vote yes on bringing her, but it certainly didn't hurt that Maria's new boyfriend, Julian, had actually worked 6 months on an oil rig a few years back. I pushed the heavy iron door open. The hinges groaned against the salt-corroded metal, the sound carrying through the empty corridors. I found the rest of the group already making their way through the narrow hallway, and was relieved to see that the area generally matched what I had already researched. The quarters consisted of 2 floors, the upper of which we were currently passing through to reach the lower-level access stairs at the end of the hall. We passed the expected amenities, including a galley, a laundry room, several changing rooms, and a large dry storage pantry, long empty. The crew living area, consisting of a common room and several shared bedrooms, waited for us 1 level below. As we descended the stairs, we each found a bedroom and began to unload our things. For the next 2 nights, these quiet, windowless white rooms would be our home. I unpacked my bedroll and went to sit on the bunk bed when I heard Mark call out to gather us in the hall. As I stood in the doorway, he smiled and looked around at each of us before speaking. All right, so we made it. Place seems to be in much better condition than we expected too, which is a good sign. I think before we start settling in for the night though, we should review our plan. A couple of us let out an overly dramatic sigh, and I looked over to see Savannah chuckling as she rolled her eyes. Even though a plan was necessary in a situation like this, we all knew that Mark would plan his own funeral if he could. Yeah, get it out of your system, Mark smirked. We'll have a busy day of fooling around out here tomorrow. But there are still precautions and things we need to take care of first. Julian, you'll come with me up to the control deck here in a minute to see if we can actually get the auxiliary generators running. That'll get us some light and heat in here. Elijah, you stay here with Maria and Sav. Julian, you ready? Sure, just give me a minute to get my stuff. I looked across the hall to see Julian smiling for the first time all day. He was hard to read at times, but I could tell the familiarity of a place like this was slowly starting to bring him to life. As Mark dismissed us from our meeting, I smiled and gestured a sloppy salute. I watched Julian pop back into the room he'd chosen and shut the door behind him for a few moments. A minute later, he emerged, pulling a pair of bolt cutters and utility gloves from his duffel bag. Maria had already changed into more comfortable clothes, ran her fingers through his curly hair, and hugged him before he and Mark left. For the first time since we boarded the helicopter earlier that evening, I had a few minutes to unwind. It was still too cold inside to take off my jacket just yet, but I kicked off my boots and laid down on the carpeted floor. Unlike anything we'd ever explored before, this place was actually fairly well kept. The carpet, although old and shaggy, was free of debris and still felt soft to the touch. My headlamp illuminated a pristine white ceiling, lower than what I expected. As Maria tried to keep idle conversation with Savannah, I just smiled and shut my eyes for a minute, enjoying the satisfaction of having pulled off the coolest B&E ever. It must have been about 10 minutes later when a low vibrating grumble shook the floor beneath us for just a minute, before settling into a droning hum barely perceptible but distinct from the ocean waves. I felt a shot of icy ocean air begin to flow through the vent above my head, before softening and becoming warm and cozy comfort. I stood up and quickly located a light switch at the end of the hallway. Flicking it bathed us in bright, artificial white light. The girls stood up and we began to take in our surroundings in full when the door at the far end of the commons room swung open, Mark and Julian returning to join us in the warmth. Maria ran up to Julian and practically tackling him as she showered praises on him with the giddiness of a schoolgirl. Mark sauntered across the newly ago interior, taking in its artifice and cramped nature before plopping down next to Savannah, resting his head on her shoulder. He looked more tired than usual, and I recognized his brow furrow. How was it out there? Do you guys find the control deck okay? I prodded after a moment. Yeah, it was fine. Julian had it right on the money. Dude knew exactly where to take us, right over the moon pole at the very top. He sounded almost apathetic as he told me, his eyes gazing off into nowhere as Savannah scratched his back. Everything okay, man? You seem a little out of it. Something happened out there? Mark stared blankly for a few seconds until his eyes focused on me and seemed to process what I said. Oh, yeah, no, nothing happened. Don't worry. It's just like, you know, when you're hit with a really bad deja vu, and instead of it only lasting a second, it lasts for like a minute or two. Savannah stopped scratching his back and wrapped her arm around his shoulders, pulling him closer. Yeah, she chimed in. I get that sometimes. It's probably going to happen at least once or twice when we're here. Been a while since we got in somewhere that wasn't rinsed already. It'll feel just like college. Yeah, I guess so. Mark seemed distant still. Julian and Maria came and sat down in the hall with us, smiling and holding hands. After a few seconds, Mark's eyes suddenly lit up. You guys won't believe how sick tomorrow's gonna be. Even what I could just see with my headlamp looked incredible. Up top in the control room, there's a shit ton of old broadcasting equipment, and you'll never guess what Julian found under the control desk. He paused, either for dramatic effect or because he really wanted us to guess. After a moment of our non-compliance, he rolled his eyes and reached into his jacket's interior pocket, pulling out a key ring, what I could only assume was every key and access tag we needed to find our way around the facility. Holy shit, it was just under the desk? Yeah, he said on his old rig. The manager dude, Hey Joel, what did they say he was called? The toll pusher, Julian said, wrapping his arm around Maria as he pulled at the carpet. Yeah, the tool pusher. Anyways, the tool pusher would always keep a master key set in his office. Only the people in the office could get in, so it was never a problem. Thankfully, we brought a key of our own. He gestured towards the bolt cutters that Julian had set down in the hall. We laughed for a moment, and then a few more. It was good to all be here and have successfully pulled this off. We'd never cracked anything like this before, and I won't lie, I think that we were just a little giddy that we'd done it. After a bit, Maria caught me beginning to yawn and followed suit. Sov checked the time, and we were surprised to see that we'd already had spent an hour on board, and midnight was rapidly approaching. Mark made some dumb remark about time flying when you're having fun, and told us to plan to wake up at 7 so that we could start exploring the upper levels. Julian and Maria slipped into the room as Savannah helped pull Mark up, and the two of them wished me good night before retreating to their bunk. I closed my door behind me, and thought to myself that this was a pretty awesome last hurrah before turning in for the night. I woke up the next morning to the sound of Mark knocking on my door. Hey Ellie, wake up man, it's nearly 7:30. We managed to get the water and stove running in the galley. Oatmeal and bacon for breakfast if you're hungry. I rolled over and checked my phone. I hadn't bothered to set an alarm, but I figured I wouldn't have slept so well as to sleep in. I groggily rolled out of bed and got dressed for the day before joining the others in the galley. Maria greeting me with a smile. Morning, idiot. Couldn't sleep? No, I slept too well. Usually I can't sleep on boats. The rocking bothers me too much. Savannah put down her instant coffee and rolled her eyes at me. Well, we're not on a boat, Ellie. There's not going to be any rocking. This thing's bolted to the sea floor. Julian put up his hand, taking a second to chew and swallow before interjecting. No, that's just shallow rigs. Deep water rigs like this are tensioned to the ocean floor with cables, so they're pretty sturdy, but they do float and rock a bit. So why didn't we feel any rocking last night? Julian shrugged. The sea must have been pretty calm all night, I guess. Mark scoffed. No way, dude. You felt how windy it was when we went out there. This thing would have been rocking like crazy if it wasn't bolted all the way down. Julian sat, brow furrowed, for a second before shrugging and returning to his food. We all finished up our breakfast and Savannah returned to the room to grab her camera while we prepared to leave the quarters. As we stepped out into the salty morning air, the daylight washed the rig in a radiant glow. It was incredible how different it looked in the daytime, the yellow structure towering past the narrow catwalk leading away from the living area. I looked down beneath the grated floor beneath me and noted that the waves seemed much more intense this morning than they had last night, crashing against the gargantuan structure sinking beneath their depths. I still didn't feel any rocking. As much as Mark typically acted the de facto leader of sorts, there was a silent understanding that at least for today, we followed Julian. He knew the ins and outs of a place like this, and we'd be way less likely to get lost if we stayed close. He led us around the catwalk towards the stairs that would take us to the upper levels. Savannah stopped us what seemed like every 20 feet to get another picture of the rig, and as much as I wanted to be annoyed, I couldn't blame her. We've entered dozens of brutalist structures before, but the rig took the cake for the most striking. Outside the crew quarters, every fastener served a purpose, nothing wasted on form over function. Platforms hung suspended in the air above our heads, utility sections that would normally be hidden from view intertwined, encompassing the limited areas designated for human use. As she stopped to take a photo of one of the platforms ahead of us, Savannah froze in place before lowering her camera and gesturing for us to hold still. Guys, do you see that? We looked to where she indicated, and sure as day, there was a security camera aimed right at us. My head immediately began to swivel around wildly, searching for any other cameras we may have missed. As Savannah, Maria, and I slowly started panicking, Mark began to laugh at us. I noticed those last night too, Mark said with a shit-eating grin. I flipped out too. Julian was kind enough to wait 5 minutes before explaining that they're not broadcasting anywhere off-site. They're wired in directly to the on-site systems. Julian leaned smugly against the rails. You could have at least let them freak out about it a few more seconds, man. That would have been hilarious. Savannah rolled her eyes and playfully punched Mark in the shoulder as she passed him on the stair. By the time we finished exploring the middle deck, it was nearly 9. We paused for a while to look out into the open sea. After a while, Maria coughed. an attempt to snag our attention. So, I don't want to sidetrack anything we're doing, but are we going to check out the signal or what? What signal? I asked. Savannah and Mark looked equally confused. Julian's face scoured, and I caught him nudging her arm as if she brought up something sensitive. She shot him an incredulous look before continuing. It's just, well, before we went to bed last night, Jewel was telling me that. I said it was probably nothing. Drop it, Julian nearly snapped at her. I stood straight up from the railing I'd been leaning against, attempting to place myself closer between the two. No, go on, Maria. What was he telling you? She looked nervous, like a puppy backed into a corner. Well, it's just that he said that there was a signal that was being broadcast to the radio from the control room. He saw on the Asili something showing a reading, but the audio must have been turned off. I was under the impression he must have told you. Mark arose from his resting place as well, also moving towards Julian. His laid-back visage was quickly shed, replaced with a burdening red anger. And you didn't bring this up, why? If someone knows we're here, we could be seriously screwed, and you and your girlfriend included. That must have been, what, 10 hours ago? Julian backed away from the two of us as Savannah put her hand on Mark's shoulder. Babe, he probably just didn't think about that. It's fine. We'll go check it out. And if not, if we end up in prison because we agreed to let Maria and this jack-off tag along? I turned to Mark. Whoa, man, Maria's the one that just let us know. Leave her out of this. Julian, caught in the middle between Mark and I, stepped back and towards Maria. Whoa, guys, calm down. I didn't mean anything by it. I saw the oscilloscope, I saw that it looked like it had been running a while, and I saw that the audio wasn't turned on. The signals come and go from these places all the time, regardless if anyone's here. I didn't bring it up because I thought it would be fun to show you guys today. That's all, swear. Mark pointed a large angry finger into Julian's chest. You're gonna take us up there right now and show us that signal. And if there's even one hint of trouble for us, you can bet your ass the cops or the Coast Guard or whoever pulls up will know just who it was that broke us in here. Julian led his way back up to the control room at the top of the rig. It was several levels higher than where we'd been prior, and reminded me of a fire watch tower overlooking the whole of the structure. Mark pulled the ring of his keys from his pocket, but Julian reminded him of last night's handiwork. He pushed the door open easily. The handle had already been destroyed by the bolt cutters. As we collectively entered the control room, it was immediately clear that this was the most advanced facility we'd seen yet. On the wall to our left, broadcasting equipment covered the entire half of the room, wires running in and out of plugs, long deactivated monitors dispersed throughout the tangled mass of cords. The wall immediately across from us consisted only of a large window, splashed and stained with dried sea salt. Outside, the window overlooked a crane that jutted out from the platform, its cable dangling far down into the murky water of the moon pool below us, concealing what lay at the end. On the wall to our right, a small metal desk lay covered in documents, while a massive control panel to its side glittered with shimmering indicators and buttons. Julian made his way over to the broadcasting station and indicated to the small green display. Sure enough, a sound wave bounced along the screen, a signal of some sort making its way to the device while no output could be heard. Well, find a way to turn the sound on, Mark implored. I could hear the thinly veiled curiosity poorly hidden behind his guise of anger. Julian searched for a moment before seemingly finding the correct knob. He turned it, and as he did, the audio signal began to play through the speakers. The sound of rushing water could clearly be heard, the slosh echoing and distorted. See? Told you it was no big deal. Just some microphone attached to the structure down at the surface. As soon as the words left Julian's mouth, a voice began to cry through the signal. It was grainy and distorted, as though the microphone recording it was too close, too old. Oh God, it worked. You're there. Please, you have to hurry. I need help. We sat frozen where we stood for several seconds, not knowing what to say. Maria cautiously approached the console, finding the closest thing that looked like a microphone, and began to speak to it. Hello? Who is this? Why do you need help? The voice cracked to life once more, this time louder and more difficult to make out. Yes, I need help. Underneath the... I can't hear you. The signal is too distorted. Slow down. Where are you? Underneath the rig. The sub facility. You'll need to take the ladder. It's in the moon pool. Please, The chamber I'm stuck in is slowly filling up with water. I have hours left at most. You need to come and activate the pumps. They're down here, but I'm locked out. Please hurry. We all looked at each other for a moment. Was this some sort of joke? What sub-facility? Savannah grabbed the microphone from Maria. I'm sorry, I don't understand. Did you say you were nearby the oil rig? Are you in a submarine or something? No, I told you, I'm under the rig. The rig is a farce. The real facility is under the water. You can get here via the lander. I think it's the blue button, right next to the desk behind you. Please hurry. The audio cut off suddenly. We sat there in silence for about 2 minutes before I spoke up. We should try to help, shouldn't we? Mark looked at me like I was insane. Help? Help who? The mystery man who claims to be under the water in a facility under an oil rig that no one's visited in a decade? Be serious, Elijah. This is clearly some sort of hoax. Savannah leaned against the desk, putting her head in her hands. I don't know, Mark. Whoever that was sounded pretty scared. Maybe this is legit. I looked across the room. Sure enough, on the panel next to the desk, a square blue button sat out amongst the rest. Underneath it, in black lettering, read the words, Submersible Lander. From my research, a type of underwater elevator. As Mark and Savannah argued about the legitimacy of the signal, I walked over to the panel. Maria stood next to me, and as I saw the fear in her eyes, I knew that she believed the mysterious voice just as much as I had. I pressed the button. A klaxon alarm sounded throughout the whole rig, interrupting the argument behind me. Julian, who had stepped over to the window, called out, Hey, everyone might want to look at this. My rig definitely didn't have one of these. As we made our way to the window, we watched as the crane rapidly reeled up its seemingly infinite supply of cable. Suddenly, from below, we heard an enormous splashing sound, followed by a thud and a click that echoed through the rest of the structure. We quickly descended the stairs, exiting the control room, and Julian rushed ahead of us, beckoning for us to follow him to the lowest platform. As I made my way down the last flight of stairs, my breath was taken away as the lander came into view. Its rusted exterior was encrusted with sea moss and barnacles. It was mounted to the pillars that descended into the moon pool below, seemingly functioning as an elevator shaft for the hidden transport. The cable that ran from the top of the crane up above was taut and tangled with all manner of sea plants. Printed in bold white letters, practically rusted over and peeling, but still legible, were the words, W&H Submersible Facility, levels 0 through 01. As we stood there awestruck, Savannah noticed a large red button on the pedestal next to the lander on the platform in front of us. Almost as by instinct, she reached out and pressed it, and the doors of the lander slid open before us. Remarkably, it was entirely dry on the inside, with no hints of leakage anywhere to be seen. There were 3 rows of 5 seats each, arranged facing inwards towards the center of the lander. It was embarrassingly long before anyone had the courage to speak. Whatever was down there, whoever was down there, was seemingly real. This was an entire portion of the facility we weren't prepared for. Maybe even the majority of the facility. But someone needed our help, right? I swallowed hard and asked my friends, So, are we getting in? Let's go. Let's go down. Let's check it out. A very smooth story. Lots of backstory, lots of character development. Loving it so far. Please like and subscribe. I'm the Masochist. Farewell. Let's go. Let's go down. Let's check it out.